making movies is hard.
Making movies is hard.
Welcome. This is the podcast about the struggle of being an independent filmmaker. I'm Eric Kohn, the founding host of the podcast, and I'm a sci-fi horror filmmaker, and my first feature film, The Alternate, is coming out to the masses in 2022.
I'm Liz Manischel. I'm a writer, director, producer who has made 2 features and currently in development on about 5 more. I'm a distribution consultant who does sales, and I used to manage Sundance's creative distribution initiative.
This week, we welcome Vietnamese writer, director Liz and Kiet on the show to talk about his latest film, The Requien, which is his first English-speaking film after spending a decade making films in Vietnam. Kiet talks about how he translated the Requien from being a Vietnamese film into an English film and outlines how he went from graduating film school in LA to becoming one of the top film directors in Vietnam. I don't know if he'd like me saying that, but that seems to be very clear that he is. After that, Liz and I discuss a hot new article by Eric Kohn from IndieWire about if Sundance Directors should be making the leap straight to Marvel movies. And then Liz has a question to ask me. But before all that, Liz, how are you doing?
Oh, because we had the pre-chat where I got out all the things that were bothering me. Now I'm trying to figure out what's bothering me. I'm doing okay. I'm frustrated by distributors right now. I'm doing sales, and I had a distributor. Here, I'll set it up, and you'll see what you think. I have a filmmaker. We're going to call her Susie. Susie's friend works with a certain distributor. And she emailed her distributor, Susie's friend, and said, will you take a look at Susie's movie? And the distributor's like, absolutely, I will screen it. So then me, Susie's rep, emailed the distributor, and they said, our slate is full, no thank you. Wouldn't even watch the movie. So I'm just very cranky, and I don't like this distributor, and I just think people are two-faced. That's how I feel. How are you?
Wow, that's crazy. So they basically just said they would, but then they were like, no, we can't.
I have it in writing. They forwarded, I have a thread where they're like, oh, of course, I'll check out this creator. Can't wait to see it. Just bullshit.
That's so funny. And do you think that reason why they're not taking a look at it is because of the genre that it is, or because there's no actors or famous people?
Yeah, okay, sure. They should have been upfront with the contact person who pitched the film in the first place, because the film that I'm repping does not have all rights available. It has a broadcast deal already and is an impact documentary. It's a wonderful movie with a very good pedigree. But I've run into this before where documentaries have a little bit of bias against them in distribution. But this distributor should not be relaying any sort of enthusiasm and then turning around and shutting the door. So I'm cranky because it just is reflective of how shitty and two-faced this system is.
Yeah, that's not cool.
Yeah.
How am I doing? I'm doing okay. I have lots of things happening right now this morning that I don't know if it's good. It was I had a clear plan. I was like, okay, I have to do this one thing for my job before I start the day, and then everything will be smooth sailing. And then, I basically got a bunch of emails from my client, with new stuff and asking for other stuff. And my daughter is staring at me as she walks by, and she just gave me the biggest smile in the world. So yes, my daughter's distracting me in the best way possible too. And then, so everything got blown up just with other things I had to take care of instead of the thing I planned to do this morning, which I don't know if you're like that, you have a plan and you're like, oh, this is great. I have this 30, 40 minutes to do this thing that I'm supposed to do. And then I have my meeting and this other meeting. And then I have this thing with you, the podcast recording, and everything's all smooth. And then it was I had to take that 30, 40 minutes dealing with my client, and then didn't get to do the task I was supposed to do. I've got 9 personal emails about the alternate and other things, and my filled M&E track is done. But then there was other things that needed to happen that from the QC artist or the QC company that they were asking for. So I asked the person doing the M&E track to do that, but then my post-sound supervisor is oh, she shouldn't be doing those things. I'm going to take care of those, or not even that I'm going to take care of those, but oh, we shouldn't take care of the things the QC house is asking for. We need to push back on the QC house and say that, we disagree with you. And I'm but I think she already did them. Can we just use the work that she did? He's well, I don't want them messing with my, and so it's all these things. This is drama with my movie, And then I talked to a really wonderful set of filmmakers who are embarking on their first feature film. And so that was the call I had before this call. And that was great. But it's in all this time doing all these things, my emails are piling up, my Slack is piling up, And I'm just like, wow, I wish I had more time in the day to do things. But luckily, this is my last meeting for the day. So when we're done with this, then I can focus with all the stuff that I have to do. So that's how I'm doing.
Amazing. I feel like, I don't know if this is how your to-do list works, but my to-do list every day, there's always like 3 or 4 things I really, really, really don't want to do. But if I do them, I will feel better. Like I will feel lighter. It sounds like your morning item was maybe one of those things that would have like transformed your whole day if you got it done, you know?
It was more like a responsibility that like I was supposed to do yesterday.
Well, yes, all of these things we're supposed to do.
And it was like, oh, well, I'll take care of it right in the morning and it'll be perfect. And, you know, my team that I'm working with on my work project, like they're fine. Like they've got things to do. It's all moving swiftly, but it's like, you know, we've gotten other things thrown at us this morning from our client too, that it's like adding up. And then on all top of all of this, I'm supposed to go to a drive-in screening of my movie in San Jose tonight.
Right.
That's happening in conjunction with Maria Maea. She's got a short film that she's producing. She's using my movie as the backdrop in the scene at a drive-in for her short film. And then like the people who are coming are supposed to like be the cars in the background to fill in as extras. And I wanted to come and like take a photo of the movie on the big screen at the drive-in and all this stuff. But it's like quickly becoming very clear that I'm not going to have time to make that 1.5-hour drive from my house in Vallejo to San Jose to watch the movie because I have to deliver this video for my client by 5.
Someone else can take that picture. You don't have to drive 90 minutes to take a picture.
I think I will ask someone on the social medias to do it for me because I know there's some people who are going. So yeah, we'll see. But anyways, it's just like my whole day's been exploded and it's not even noon yet. So that's how I'm feeling today. This is my
theory about Tuesdays. I've brought this up before. By Tuesday, and I think it's like 8 p.m. Maybe it's not. Let's give people leeway. 9 or 10 p.m. on Tuesday, you will feel like a better person. You will get enough done where you feel like the rest of the week is going to be fine. There's like this weird confidence game that Tuesday plays with you and you're going to achieve, you're going to win. You're going to win the battle of Tuesday. So, Alrik, you're going to be okay. But yes, that is very frustrating.
Well, one thing that we've been doing lately, or I've been doing lately, is we've been doing videos on our Patreon page, like little private videos for people, not just for people, for our special patrons. You know, they're the only ones who get to see these videos. So I think I'll do a video on how my Tuesday is going around 3 or 4 o'clock today. And to follow up on this, to be like, okay, well, this is not going to make much sense if you watch it now when I'm posting it on Tuesday, you know, the 25th. But when you hear the next week's episode, this will all make perfect sense. It'll all tie together.
I think you should post at 8 p.m. and say, you won the battle against Tuesday is what I want. Okay. I think that's the real core of this update.
Yeah. To be like, okay, did I win the battle or did I lose the battle? Yeah. Well, anyways, so if you want to watch this video that we're talking about, don't forget to support us on Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/MMIH podcast. Thanks again to everyone who was on the AMA a couple weeks ago. That was so cool. We're going to be doing more of these things, I swear. But we've been doing these bonus videos. I've done 2 so far. I find that I have more, like an easier time making a video of me just talking than I do writing a tweet. I can't tweet. I can't do it. Or Facebook posts. Like I used to be able to do Facebook posts. I can't do them anymore. I don't know what's wrong with me. Like I don't have the ability in me, but like I can make a video and post it to YouTube and pop it up on Patreon. No problem. So I'll be doing more of that. Maybe Liz will do 1 or 2. Maybe if we're lucky.
It's on my list. I just wrote it down on my today's to-do list. We'll see if I win the battle against Tuesday.
Yeah, I would love to. I want to see what Liz talks about in her video to like contrast what I talk about in my video. I think it'll be very interesting to see Liz in her element versus me in my own element. It'll be very interesting. You should also make sure to check out Jambox.io. They're a new royalty-free music and sound effects company with an emphasis on high-quality cinematic cues, which I can attest to because I'm using them on my trailer recut that I'm doing right now, and they do have quite a few cinematic cues to choose from. They offer customized plans to fit your needs, and they focus on working with composers on an exclusive basis, so you won't hear all these traps popping up on all other platforms, which is pretty cool. You can use our code MMIH when signing up to get a 20% discount on your subscription. But without any more blither brather or mess-ups or mistakes or whatever, here is our chat, my chat, with Lee Van Kiet. So with me today is Lee Van Kiet, the director of the Requien. Thank you so much for being here today. Just give us the elevator pitch for the movie. Tell us what it's about.
The Requin is about a couple who have marital problems who go on a vacation and they meet the impossible, which is nature, and they have to rekindle their love and look to each other to survive this massive, unfortunate situation, which is, it gets worse and worse for them, and they will find it in themselves to survive. And who will survive, we don't know.
And how many days did you shoot the film?
We shot it, actual shooting days, I believe it was 21 days. Yeah, 21, 23, I believe, yes. It was in and around that time, yeah.
And if you can say, like, what was the rough budget of the film?
Rough, I can't say. I don't know specifically.
Can you give us like a rough, like, is it like 10 million, 20 million?
No, it's below 10. It's below 10, for sure.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
And it'd probably be in the middle of, really low to, under 10.
And then how did you get attached to the project?
It started with my producing partner that worked the festival circuit and sales and distribution and sales in Vietnam. And he brought my script to be read in the markets. And Filmbridge, and also in the really early stages, Endeavor Content had interest in it. But eventually Filmbridge took it over and started the financing process. So it came from the film markets.
And then how did you come up with the idea for the movie?
At the time, there were a lot of talk about how great shark movies can be and how it sells and all that chatter. But it wasn't coming from me, obviously. It was coming from a lot of the salespeople, and everyone just wanted a shark movie, basically. But I kind of did it as a challenge. Like, how can I write a shark movie that can sell, but I wouldn't be selling out as making a Sharknado or something that is ridiculously like just not with any substance, right? I mean, I'm not hating on Sharknado because it's already done really well and it's got its own value to its fans. But for me, I just wanted to do something very important and very special too, cloaked in a shark genre. And so I sat and wrote it, and it just, everything came as instinctual as I could, because I just didn't want to overthink it as a shark genre. And so it just became this journey rather than a gimmick, a shark gimmick of, but you do get the shark flavor and also the shark genre towards the part of the film that deserves it. And so it's still considered a shark movie.
Did you write this on spec? Just kind of, someone was like, oh, you should write a shark movie. They sell well. Or did you actually get hired to write the script?
It was on spec. Yes. That's the scenario. It was, I wasn't putting all of my faith and career in this one script, right? I still had other things I was doing in Vietnam and there were other projects I was getting ready to do, but it was more of a spec situation, and it was really up to me whether it was going to go anywhere.
Nice. And then how long did you spend working on the film, from writing the script to the movie coming out today?
Coming out today. Wow. I'm backtracking from memory lane here. It might have been a good 4 to 5 years from now, I believe. I think it was 5 years ago that we just had a conversation of it being, actually, it started out as a Vietnamese movie, an Asian movie. The characters were Asian and it was a local movie. But talking to financiers and talking to people who are interested in it, they actually wanted it as an English movie. And so I took a chance and converted to a Western movie, basically, and changed the characters and converted to what it is today.
And then compared to all the other projects you've done, how difficult was this one?
Wow. I mean, every project has its own story, right? And its own difficulties. But this one wasn't any different. It was challenging we had to shoot it in the middle of COVID because it was financed. It was a go November of prior COVID year. In and around that time, it was already financed. It was a go, and Alicia was attached. And so everything looked great. And the COVID hit. And so it was delayed further and further. And then it came to a point where it's either we're going to make it or nobody's going to make this movie, right? And so everyone just came together with all the limitations with COVID. And budget had to go up, obviously, because of COVID, and nobody was prepared for that. We had to shoot it in places where we had to compromise a bit, in terms of traveling, because we initially wanted to shoot in a proper ocean and everything that was maybe in Mexico. But that obviously during COVID, nobody could have traveled. And so, yeah, it was all the things that are part of a movie being difficult. This was it. There was weather problems. The crew, we couldn't have a massive amount of crew. One was that it was away from Hollywood, obviously. So our local crew really came from Atlanta, and that was limited. But yeah, I think we went through something very difficult, but everybody was having a great time making it. Everybody was a pro, and we were just, like warriors during that time, because it was under the gun, because the weather was very uncompromisable.
And where did you end up shooting the film?
We shot it in Florida.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And we predicted, nobody can predict the weather, right? But we anticipated it being a lot nicer during that time of the year, which was in October, I believe, early October, late September. But we tried to time it better, but we had hurricane problems. We had very violent rain and wind. The wind was the worst for us, because we weren't able to, hold up a green screen or certain scenes.
Wow. And did you shoot actually like in the ocean off of Florida, or did you do most of it in tanks? Like, how did you do all the water scenes?
We did about a week in the soundstage, which was, I forgot the town, but it was nearby in Orlando. But we did just shoot in the soundstage with some water, but it wasn't the actual body of water. It was things that we were splashing around and throwing water and all that. And when we went to the open ocean scenes, we were shooting at the Universal Studio lot, the water park.
Oh, nice.
With the wave machine.
Oh,
so we it was pretty cool. It was very cool. That was one of our difficulties too, because something like that it sounds great and exciting, but once you actually get your hands in it, it's uncontrollable. It doesn't mold to your needs. But it felt real. It felt like the real open ocean. And then we did I think a week in a real pool outside in the open, so that we can have that space.
Was the park open when you shot, or were they closed?
No, I don't believe it was open. Not our section. It was open in certain areas, but it wasn't as. I think that's the reason why we were able to use it, because it was low capacity, or certain sections were closed.
Just a small story. Like I worked on 2 days in Universal Studios in Los Angeles, and they don't close the park when you shoot there at all. Even and they do their tours and everything. So we had to shoot around the tours happening, which was a nightmare. And apparently every filmmaker has to deal with that. They don't shut that down for anybody, because it just makes so much more money. Yeah, I think we were lucky, because I don't think they wanted to shut down, but I think during that time it was very few people traveling. Right. Yeah. Because of COVID and everything. So you just got lucky. Yeah. So I'm curious. I have so many questions, but I'm just going to just to stay on the same film. Mm-hmm. What was the experience like translating the film from, being a Vietnam movie to a Hollywood movie? Was that challenging? And what did that entail? Was it literally just changing the language, or was there other elements that you had to change? The action part and obviously the plot twist and the second act, it didn't change much, because both script had a version of them being lost in the ocean and having shark attacks. So that stayed the same. The tricky part was changing the culture of the couple and the nuance of where they come from, their backstory. That took me a lot of work, because I just had to go to a different place to write something like that, because it wasn't in the local version, it was a very young couple who's just starting their life, and they have these family obligations, and they have their mother and their father being very against the marriage, but they married anyway, and they kind of married in secret, or in being a rebel, against their parents. And then they just went out to a vacation. But when I changed it to an American version, I had to change it completely. It became a middle-aged couple. It became a couple who've been married for a while, and
beginning to have marital problems, and they couldn't get over their loss and their grief, and they're in the middle of grief, and they're going into this trip for healing. So that was a big difference, right? Yeah.
So just to like kind of go back in time a little bit, like you've been making films for a long time. Like this is like your 8th or 9th feature or something like that, right?
I don't know the exact number, but yeah, you might be close. It might be maybe 7. Counting the one I'm doing now, it might be, around 8.
So like I was doing a little research on you. It looked like you went to school in UCLA, and then you made a movie in Los Angeles, like your first feature. And then from there, you like went back, to Vietnam, and that's where your career's been for the majority of the time since then. So just talk about that a little bit, like what it was like making your first feature in Hollywood, and like why you decided to move to Vietnam.
My first film was kind of like they call it my thesis film for a graduate program. I decided to just make a feature film because in a graduate program, you're limited, right? You can only make a short movie. I went to the UCLA undergrad and got an award there for my short movie. And so I felt like I've gone to that program and process. And then when I was in my grad program, I felt I wanted to do more. I wanted to explore different skills and a little bit be a little bit out there in the world. And so I decided to do a feature film in conjunction with my studies. But it was self-financed. It was self-everything. I mean, it's your classic, like, beg, borrow, steal kind of guerrilla, because it was a personal story for me. It was about the early 90s as an immigrant growing up in Orange County and in an urban area, that there was this explosion of gang violence and urban kind of teenage angst. And so it was during the time of the riots and all that stuff happening in our Southern California landscape. Obviously, I was young, and it was my first time ever doing a feature. So it stayed within the community. This was 2004 or so. And, the landscape in Hollywood now is very different, right? There's a lot of inclusion and diversity and openness. But even in 2004, it was virtually none. I didn't really have the opportunities to come out there and to tell my story, or if I had been more aggressive, I'm not sure, but I just didn't find it that easy for even from somebody who had film school background to even get in the door. So I just kind of made it my own. And because of that movie, there were a lot of investors from Vietnam, and there were a lot of people who were very interested in Vietnam as the next growth in media. And they saw my film in festivals, and they reached out to me, and they invited me over to Vietnam to make movies. And, there wasn't really anything going for me in the States. So I just decided to, around 2010 or so, go to Vietnam and start making films.
And did you have like any special connection in Vietnam that allowed that to happen? Or was it literally like they just saw this film, on the festival circuit, and they were like, they just approached you and said, hey, you look like a great filmmaker. Let's go do some stuff.
Yes, it was a part of that. But also there was a group of us, and they're still working right now. And we came up together in Vietnam, and now you will see everybody, the directors and filmmakers that are prominent right now in Vietnam. We all come from the same area, actually, in Southern California. And
oh, really?
So there's about 3 or 4 of us, and they're the leaders in the industry right now in Vietnam. I was very proud to be part of that class. And so we had each other, but we were more or less on our own anyway. But because we had the skills coming from the States, and investors were more warm to us and wanting to talk to us, and how we can contribute to the industry out there and how it can grow. And since then, it's growing exponentially, and it became a prominent industry within the past few years now. And it's just because Vietnam is in the market now.
So talk about like your first feature in Vietnam. Like, what was that experience like? Did you have like a nice big budget? Like, did you have to fight to get like, just a little bit of money to make the movie? And like, what kind of movie was it? Like, talk about all that stuff.
The first few projects I had in, there were a lot of interest, and there were a lot of like, let's go. So things were moving very fast, but it's like the Wild West when it started. It's trying to make things as independent and as cost efficient as possible, but still have an upside of investment. And so because theaters wasn't a big thing back then, 10 years ago, it was slowly coming in. It's when you start having CJ and CGV and Latte coming in and owning all the theaters now, multiplexes, that budgets were going up. But back then, the budgets were very small. You had to be very resourceful, but yet you're faced with a film industry that more or less didn't really exist. It was mainly people from TV or people who kind of learned on the job. And so there wasn't any established talent. And so you had to really be that filmmaker that can do everything. So that was one of the difficulties. But no, I would not say that the budgets were large back then at all, even in local standards, because there was a lot of risk that people didn't understand. They were willing to try, but they didn't have anything in context to apply their method or their investment approach. So they were just kind of playing it by ear. And for example, a movie could be done, this was 10 years ago, obviously, but it could be done for $200,000 back then, but it made $1 million, in the box office. And so that encouraged everybody, right, immediately. And so the next budget would be 400,000, and then it would make, even if it made back its money, people started to get really excited. And only recently, within a few years from today, our budget's in around $1 million. So they're kind of the big movies right now are averaging $1 million for budget.
And can you just paint a picture of the film industry in Vietnam, like kind of, when you got started versus now? Like, was it just like a bunch of, Hollywood movies that were being played there? And like, were there theaters? Like, were there local movies being made? Or was it sort of just like not really, like very few and far between? And then, you're part of this generation of filmmakers that are like, okay, we're actually going to make movies in Vietnam, like, in our own language, not just Hollywood stuff.
Right. Yes. When I started, there wasn't a lot of movie theaters. It was still a privileged thing to do, is to go to a theater, because it was only in the main city, which is Ho Chi Minh, Saigon, or Hanoi, and the big cities in the resort areas. So there wasn't multiplexes at all 10 years ago. I shouldn't say 10 years ago. It's about maybe 2008 or 2009. There was very few. And so when we were making films, it kind of reflected that. We couldn't really go for it in a big scale. So we had to challenge ourselves also to work in limitations. But slowly, the market became much better when there were more movies being made, because the diaspora in Vietnam is very young. I think Vietnam is known to be one of the youngest countries in the world, meaning that there's just not a lot of old people. So the appetite is very strong. And as people were testing the multiplexes, it grew exponentially, because you see kids who are in the countryside who only go to movies as their pastime. And it became a habit where they're not just watching one movie a month, or they're actually watching 2 to 3 movies a week. And because that's something that I know Western cultures took for granted, kind of think it's a norm. But in these parts of the country, they never grew up with it. And so they were very excited to be part of that wave. The movie industry right now is starting to get very commercialized now. Before, it was mainly just things that are from television that they're used to. And if you're going to do a local movie, then you have to abide by really the techniques and also the style of what they're used to during that time, which is mainly sitcoms and the TV movies. But the young people were very into the Hollywood movies. The appetite for Hollywood movies kind of overstepped the local movies even quicker, because the kids were very young. The average age that went to movies were 13, 14 to 16. And so as filmmakers like me came in there with more of a Western structure and a Hollywood structure, but then our movies obviously were Vietnamese and spoke the language, the local language, then they warmed up to that. It was something that they needed to have a better experience. And so that's where you are right now, is that movies that tend to be very successful, they're the ones that are made more in the Hollywood style and that kind of budget too. Yeah.
And what does it look like now? Like, are, the Marvel movies, like the big budget Hollywood movies, are they still like the most popular things at the box office in Vietnam? Or like, are the local movies kind of taking more of those eyeballs away from the Hollywood?
So surprisingly, it depends. Marvel does fairly well. Fast Furious does fairly well. But things that are very specifically American culture, like Star Wars, it's not very popular in Vietnam. So you like, for example, people went out in droves watching Spider-Man, the recent Spider-Man. But if Star Wars were to come out, you wouldn't see anybody in the theaters. So there's a big difference there. However, the film that has been breaking box office numbers consistently are local films, actually, even above Hollywood movies. The film I did, Fury, that broke the box office at that time. And the latest one broke that record too. And it was also a local movie.
Wow, nice. So talk about Fury, because I know I was just looking and it got like tons of awards, tons of positive reviews all over the world, not just in Vietnam. So can you just talk about like what that movie was like to make it, and like, was it like a big jump from your other budgets, to do that film, and then talk about like what your filmmaking career has been like since that movie has come out.
Great, thanks. Yes, so Fury came about when one of my first movies was a horror movie in Vietnam, and I worked with Veronica Ngo, she's a famous star in Vietnam, and she also has a few parts in Hollywood that you might be familiar with. But it was during that time, 2017 or so, that her and I just needed to make a movie together, since we haven't worked with each other for about 5 years or so. And so she really wanted it to be one of her last real action movies, because she feels she hasn't really gotten one in basically since her last one. And we just really dug our feet and roll up our sleeves and just really got into what kind of movie we wanted to make, and where the market is going in Vietnam. And we really target the local taste as much as we could. But obviously, where she comes from in her action world, and where I come in my LA filmmaking, we knew that we needed that kind of flavor of a Hollywood structure, of a proper Western style movie, but then also have the heart and the soul of the local people. So we took care of that very carefully. It wasn't really a big budget for what we were shooting for. I mean, we were going for the biggest movie in Vietnam, basically, but obviously we were limited to whatever the investors were comfortable for. And so it was, I believe it was a little bit over $1 million for what we did it for. And it hit a nerve, I think, because it was one of the very few movies during that time that came out with that style and that rhythm and kind of that style of storytelling. And the audience really gravitated to it. And there was a huge amount of positivity towards it being kind of like a prideful film for us to reach globally so far, and a very entertaining piece that everybody can watch. And since then, it's been great for me. I made another horror movie for Endeavor, and I think during that time, the Requin came into the picture, because also a lot of the investors that are in the Requin, they saw Fury. And I'm doing The Princess now for Disney and Hulu currently. So
that's awesome.
Another action movie. And so, yeah, it's been great. It's been a whirlwind for me, but it's just shows that we didn't try to go everywhere with that movie. We didn't try to satisfy everybody's taste, but we really wanted to impress our people, the locals first. And in turn, everybody in the world saw us for what we did and really appreciated the culture that was in there.
Is The Princess, is that going to be an English speaking movie as well, or?
Well, yeah, The Princess it's a 20th century movie, Disney and 20th Century Fox. It stars Joey King. Yes, it is
nice.
It's an American movie.
Awesome. So do you feel like the Fury kind of opened doors for you to like get to like English speaking movies? And was that ever something that you were like going for? Is it just sort of like a happy thing, that an accident that happened? Like, have you been trying to get back to Hollywood this whole time, like from, working in Vietnam, or are you just sort of like open to whatever and you just take what comes?
I was very open to coming to Hollywood, basically, but I knew well enough that it's just not, it wasn't in my control, right? I wasn't knocking on their door because, one, I was busy and I was trying to know my own craft and voice and working in Vietnam and everything. So I knew it was going to come either way if I made that one good movie. And I kind of felt it after we finished Fury and we had such great reaction that there was going to be something, but I never really forced it and looked for it. But they eventually came to me and called me, and it was much more pleasant of experience than I ever thought that it would be, because I just didn't have it in my thinking that I would be forcing it, and then so that I guess the way I approached it was more Zen-like.
What were you like thinking that it was going to, like, how would you imagine it being unpleasant? Like, did you think it was going to be like harder to make a movie, in Hollywood, or what were you anticipating?
I think what made me more nervous about that thought was the selling part of it, the selling myself part of it. That's where that world to me is very difficult. I'm a lot better at it now, obviously, because I'm starting to know agents and managers and all that stuff, but and the pitching game. But it's because in Vietnam, you really, it's a different thing. You're making a movie as a part of you contributing to the country, to something big, like growth, right? And Hollywood's different. Hollywood's you're not really doing much for other than the box office sales or growing a big conglomerate. But there's a sense of kind of family in Vietnam filmmaking. You're there and you see your crew member and everybody who's been working for you and with you too. And you have an emotional attachment to that. And you want to make movies for them and with them because it's part of their livelihood too. And it's so important to that industry and the people that I work with every day that never pulls me away, But as far as Hollywood is very enticing too. Everybody wants to be there and everybody wants to make films there, obviously. But I feel that if it's not part of my personality at a certain project, then it's going to be very hard for me to kind of give up what I have in Vietnam, which is making films of the heart, rather than it's a very business transaction in America.
What has it been like? Because I'm sure you can't say what the budget is on The Princess, but I'm imagining it's a lot greater than what you've been having on your previous films. So what has that transition been like? Has it just been like a lot easier to work with a bigger budget, or are there other challenges that you weren't expecting that you come across when, leveling up like that?
Well, I was lucky to have the experience that I did in Vietnam because I learned that it's less about control and it's more about you as a storyteller and down to the most basic is writing. And that's really where my strength is. And it's less about showing your control over everything with the camera or the talent or the way it has to be done. So when I spoke to Hollywood about The Princess, it was exactly how I would have imagined a smooth situation would be, is because I don't have to do everything. There's and that was a relief. I kind of expected it to be like that, but it I reveled in it because everybody's on top of the game. Everybody comes to the table with their best ideas and their greatest effort. And you are just kind of guiding the vision of the movie that in the beginning, you're already telling the studio and the producers of where I'm going for and what I'm going to do. And you're never going to get to the next step of even working with any crew member if you don't have that down or if you're trusted with that vision. And so I think that's a great way to work, is that you get that down first. You get that first step in as far as what your vision is and what you want to do and get everybody's trust. And then pretty much after that, you're surrounded by the best people possible to get that across, that vision across. And really, you're just letting them know everything from what the color is, what this princess needs to look like. And that should already be in your mind and in your head prior to you even being on set. And so I find that very rewarding because I've been doing it. And so shifting it from a bigger budget and a bigger scale, I pleasantly surprised that I don't have to do everything myself. And that's really what the advantage is.
So I noticed that you're not credited as a writer on The Princess, and I know that you've written a lot of your other, or almost all your other stuff. So was that a challenge to come into a project where you weren't, actually writing, especially since you said that was like one of your strong suits?
Yes. I think what I meant about writing too is you're expected to develop the script, right? And even from a writer, and you come in and you're changing the tone and you're commenting on the scenes and you're converting the scenes to a certain way. That's a lot of writing. It's a lot of back and forth and it's a lot of communication. the script is not my original piece or anything like that. But I found myself during the prep and then during the development part of it with the studio, there was a lot of writing involved. It's not necessarily an actual IP credit, but that part of directing is very real. You do have to write out what you want in a movie and what you're going for. And so that's what I mean by, that's one of my strengths.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good point. It's like, even if you're just giving notes to a writer, or you're like, prepping for the movie, like there's an insane amount of writing that goes into all that stuff that you never get credit for as a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And then can you talk about like getting that job? Like, because you said that like it kind of came to you after you had your other successes with your other films, but do you still have to like do a pitch process? And like, was there a chance that you wouldn't get it? Like, was there a lot of work that you had to like do to like secure the job? Or was it more like, no, they just love your work and they're like, no, you're ready. Let's go.
I got a call out of the blue, and that was just the first introduction. And yeah, they sent me the script and want to know my thoughts, obviously. And what kind of movie would I be doing if it's the script? And so there's a lot of that going on in the beginning after the initial call. And so you're going to write out what you mean. And the meeting room starts to get fuller, of other executives. And at first it starts with the producer that really is interested in talking to you. And then it became the executive and more executives and creative executives. And the room starts to get bigger. And so you just have to grow with that room as far as your communication and your vision. And I did that. I did that for a good 2 months, I believe. But during that 2 months, I was never told clearly that I got the job. I just had to, it wasn't anything like that. It was more like, okay, we're in this step. So let's go to the next step. Let's go to the next step. And it became working with the script, and became developing it and talking and back and forth and making it better. And until everybody feels that they're in a safe place, then I felt like I got the answer, and then it became official.
And what kind of materials did you provide and create during this time? Like, did you do a treatment? Did you do like a lookbook or like a rip-o-matic? Like, what kind of stuff were you showing, people at these different meetings?
In the beginning, it was basically a treatment of what your vision of the movie is going to be. And it could be there's no real format for it. It's all how you communicate. So it could be in the writing. And then what I did for a pitch meeting, and this is usually what a studio exec would expect it to be, to even go to the next step with you, is that you pitch your visuals and accompanying it with what you wrote out as far as the vision of the movie. And so I complemented it with a visual presentation. It could be anything. It could be clips from movies, or it could be stills that is put together and, in accordance to your way of illustrating the movie, telling the movie from A to Z. What's the first act like? What's the third? What's the second? What's the third? And where it's going to go, and how is it going to be trimmed down or converted into, your vision. And so, there's a lot of that happening, and you never know if you're doing it right or not. It's because there's just no right way to do it. If I can say that, there's just, if you feel that you've communicated the movie in such a way that they're enticed enough and they get it enough that they would move forward with you, then you're in a good place.
So after this project, you've got this, it's coming out this year, very exciting. Are you thinking that you're going to continue to make movies in Vietnam, or are you kind of eyeing to move to Los Angeles and, kind of make that your, where you make your movies going forward? Or is it kind of like, oh, I want to do both?
I mean, Vietnam was such a special place for me for so long. And I was born there actually. And coming back to my home, my roots, and knowing the people for so long and bonding with them, I can never give that up. And there's just so much to do in Vietnam. There's so many stories to tell. The growth is great. The world wants to know what's going on, right, in Vietnam, and that excites me. And the people they have so much to tell, and that will never leave me. So I'm always going to find ways to do something very creative in Vietnam to help with the industry, and also to get more people aware of where we are now, perspective to our very famous but dark history. and sad history, and where we are, what have we been doing for the past 40 years, and where we are now, and where we're going to go. And so that interests me a lot. And Hollywood, and I think I've said this before, is like to a lot of my colleagues in Vietnam, is that Hollywood is always going to be there. It's been going on for 200 years or so, and they're not going anywhere. And they're just going to they're there. But Vietnam, where we're at right now, is special, and it's changing every day, and it's getting more special every day, and that's something to always be a part of.
Oh, that's awesome, man. This feels like a really great place to move on to our final 6 questions. So I was going to dive right in here. What's the first film you ever made, and how do you feel about it now?
Does that count as short film or an actual? Yeah,
whatever. Yeah, it could be short film, could be feature, whatever, however you want to answer it.
The very first one I did is a short film at my film school, and it won an award, the Jack Nicholson Award. It was the first time I've ever received money for a piece of art that I did, and I was shocked. But looking back at it now, it was shot on Super 16, and I still feel that intention-wise, it's still very special to me, because it was a short scene about a little boy who eats lunch on a regular, normal afternoon, but he's hearing these heightened sounds of fear because his father is the way he cooks is very violent, and he just sees food as a burden rather than as something that is a part of a human pastime or need. But I still feel the message of the film is great. But as far as the technical part of it is a little bit hard to see, because we did everything analog. I wasn't part of that digital generation. But I feel that the things that I did with that film has taught me a great base to go on, because everything was analog. We had to decide very carefully every shot, every frame, because you're burning film, and that means you're burning money. And sound was much more difficult. You recorded on Nagra, and it wasn't cheap, and you had to transfer it, and you had to retransfer it. You had to cut on a flatbed. And so it was a tedious manual process that I learned from one of my very first film. But those are the kind of skills that I think the new young filmmakers these days never really get to experience, because it's all digital and it's all very, very, very quick and fast. But I find that because of that short film, it gave me a lot of good basis to go on.
And what's the best filmmaking advice you've ever received?
Let's see. There were a few, but the best one would probably be, I'm probably going to butcher this, but I think I heard it from Scorsese, and he said that if you don't know that you're going to vomit on your first rough cut, then you're not going to be in a good place. You'd rather be vomiting on your first cut rather than vomiting it on the final stages of the edit.
Right. What's the worst filmmaking advice you've ever received or heard?
Worst one is probably, I've heard something like, you just need to put it out there and it'll take care of itself, that kind of thing. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. I think it became an exercise of quantity, like kind of just flood the world out there with stuff. I did try that in my early career, and I found out that wasn't the way to go, because I had a few films that either flopped or was banned. It's because I didn't think about it. I just did it because that kind of thing where just put it out there and you'll be fine. It's quantity. So that's not a good thing to do.
Why was one of your films banned? Was it a ratings thing, or? It
was a ratings thing. Vietnam has its own censorship, just very, very similar to China. And in the early stages, when I was working in Vietnam, I couldn't do a lot of the things that were very taboo, and there wasn't really a strict exact rule book on what you can do and what you can't. But if the censorship board feels that your film oversteps certain things, then they have a right to ban it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Next question. Do you have a goal as a filmmaker?
I only have really one pursuit, is that it's to pursue every story and everything that I'm attracted to, that I do it for the right reason. And the right reason meaning that it's got to have a basis of, like, it's worth all my all. It's got to be something where it's embedded in me to go for it, and without any sort of materialistic reasons. And I think that's been helping me more than anything, is that being honest and kind of very rational about my decisions. And I think the biggest goal for me as a filmmaker is that after a film that I've done, if I get to a place where I say that I did that for the right reason and that it turned out just right, then I think I would make every movie like that.
If you could go back in time, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself when you were younger?
It's okay to work at a Starbucks and write at night. It's very okay. You can tell I didn't do that. But
you never did that, not even when you were younger in LA?
No, that's my advice I would give my younger self, because that's to me, that's the key to really becoming a filmmaker. From my experience. Yeah.
And then the final question, is making movies hard?
It is probably one of the hardest things out there to do, but it's very much like the concept of no pain, no gain. You have to love it to the point where it's so hard, it's good. And I think that when you get to that place, you know that you're going to succeed in this, because if you're just looking at these hardships and all the difficulties coming at you, and it could be anything. It could be like trying to log into Premiere or something like that, and you can't even do that. Well, you know what? You got to do it. and those are the things that I find that it's subjective, right? Everybody thinks certain things are hard and certain things are not. But to me, if it's not hard, then it's not worth doing it.
Awesome. So where should people go to watch your film? Is it, website? Where is it available? Blast it out.
Fury is in Netflix a lot. It circulates sometimes because there's different territory that shows up. Sometimes in Europe at one. So check Netflix a lot. Amazon has some of my older stuff, I believe. But yeah, I think those are the two places to really see it. But you will get to see my newest one on either Disney Plus or Hulu, wherever you're at in the world. But I believe in Europe it's Disney Plus and Sky, and the US will be Hulu. So you'll be seeing that this summer. The Requin, I know Lionsgate and Saban is our distribution, and those are the awesome companies to be involved with, and I'm very excited that they're part of this. And I believe it's going to be in streaming, but I just don't know exactly where. I know it's going to be on Blu-ray soon. Go to the site, and I think you'll hear the latest news.
And I'm getting a message here: January 28th in theaters and on demand and digital on the 28th.
Fantastic.
In the US. So
okay,
look out for that. We'll have all the information on the show notes. And then, of course, I can't wait to see The Princess when it hits Disney Plus or Hulu, because that sounds like an awesome movie. Although there's like almost no information about it out. There's no synopsis. All it says is Joey King. That's it, so the mysteriousness is like, it's exciting,
Yeah. I could say she's a princess in the vein of John Wick and Sleeping Beauty.
So since Liz wasn't part of the conversation, I'm just going to talk about the thing that I've been thinking about since I talked to Kiet. Well, he's an amazing person. I mean, he's so calm, so collective, and just so like well thought out in everything that he does. And, he like started here, made a feature in Los Angeles, and then moved to Vietnam, right? And like did all these movies. And then, he's in this place where like he had one of the biggest hits in Vietnam with Fury, at the time, top grossing blockbuster in Vietnam, period, to that date. So it's like, that's pretty incredible. And then, he's just doing his thing, making movies in Vietnam. And then Hulu and Disney just call him out of the blue, like cold call, and say, hey, do you want to talk to us about making this movie, The Princess? And he's like, sure. And like, through this conversation, like he outlines all like what happened and how he approached and like how he pitched it, what materials he made, all this stuff. But the thing that we didn't really talk about was like, he just didn't need it. Like he didn't have this stress on him where it's like, oh, if I don't get this deal, my life is ruined. Oh, if this Hulu deal doesn't happen, like what am I going to do for my next movie? Like he already had another movie like that he's working on, that he's in pre-production for, or even like maybe had shot at that point. Like he's not worried about like what his career is going to be. So he could like go into these Hulu meetings and Disney meetings and just be like, cool as a cucumber, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why he ended up getting the deal and making the movie, and like why, like while we're, doing this conversation, he's in London doing post sound for his Disney feature. And it's just like looking at this guy, I'm like, wow, like he is living the dream. So yeah, pretty cool conversation. Liz, I can't wait to hear what you think of it when you get a chance to listen to it. But yeah, that was a lot of fun.
I always like to compare everything to relationships, but it reminds me of like, if you don't need someone, you appear more attractive, right? So it's like, I can't imagine not needing Disney though. Like I can't imagine being in a world where you're not like, oh, I really hope I get this Disney job. Like that sounds wonderful. Let's get to that stage in our careers.
Yeah, it sounded like he just had a lot of fun. Like I asked him like, oh, was there challenges? Like blah, blah, blah. He's like, no, it's just like have more money, more people, more time. It was great. I was like, oh yeah, that does sound pretty great, doesn't it? Amazing.
Oh my God. Well, speaking about larger studio productions, this week we have an article from Eric Kohn over at IndieWire about the trend of Sundance directors getting plucked to hire tentpole films like Marvel movies. And his suggestion is that filmmakers maybe shouldn't say yes to these offers. Eric interviews a few directors who fit this trend, or references a few directors that fit this trend. They also talk a little bit about like the way that the marketplace could transform if the directors of note that come out of Sundance don't immediately go to these massive budget films. I'd be curious, Alrik, what you thought of this article.
Well, so I kind of felt like, he had one good reference that actually fit his, thesis, but I don't think his other references were as apt. Like the John Watts reference of, directing Cop Car and then immediately going to the Spider-Man movies, I thought was like a really good, clear example of this. But then he like says how much he likes the Spider-Man movies. So I'm like, well, then is it really a bad thing? Because he made a bunch of really great movies that we all love. Like I haven't seen the new one, but the other two I thought were pretty decent and fun. So it's like, I don't know, is that a bad thing? And then like he references Ryan Coogler, but like, it's like part of the article that I gleaned from it was like, what would these filmmakers have done if they didn't go to make Marvel movies? Like what crazy, amazing artistic films would they have made? And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure Ryan Coogler would have made Creed if he had anything he could make, because he did make Creed. And that was like the project he was trying to make before he made Fruitvale Station. So I think your fucking thesis didn't really work here, because like filmmakers should just do what they want to do. And like, if you ask Ryan Coogler, like, is there another movie that he wanted to make more than Black Panther? I'm pretty certain the answer is no. I think if you have the chance to make Black Panther, you're going to fucking make Black Panther, right? Like you're not going to go, oh, I'm going to make this art house movie instead.
Well, it felt like really patronizing the way he talked about filmmakers. Like one of the arguments Eric Kohn says is like that these filmmakers came out of Sundance with their first features and they need more time to refine their voice. And I just think that's absurd, because we spent our voice is our personality. Our voice is the core of ourselves. And we've spent our entire lives. It's an evolution. We're never going to have a refined voice. Every film is an evolution of that voice. And for you to premiere a film at Sundance, you have a resume that leads you up to that point of different experiments, of different projects. I just think it's like he gives Sundance a lot of credit for discovery, when we all know, though Sundance does confirm success, I wouldn't say they necessarily discover talent. They track talent. And so to say that these filmmakers need more time and need to ripen in other ways, that to me felt very patronizing. And also, sorry, I am going to go on a soapbox. What is frustrating is, what about the producers, the editors, the cinematographers that then lose out on those massive paydays that then, help pay to get food on their table for their family? Because so much of filmmaking is collaborative and having this core team that travels with you from film to film. So if that director chooses a smaller project, them and the rest of their team may be working for scale, and they may have lost out on a massive opportunity that's never going to come their way again. Because I doubt that a Marvel film is going to try to poach you, twice. Lightning doesn't really strike twice.
Yeah. No, if you turn down Marvel after Sundance, you're probably never going to get to work for Marvel again. Right. And so like, that's my other thought. It's like, you'd be pretty dumb to like not to take the job, because you could always make an art house movie. And I'd almost guarantee that it's going to be 1,000 times easier to make your art house movie after you've directed a Marvel movie than it is before you directed a Marvel movie. So I don't really understand like what director would ever should make that choice and why they would make that choice. the other thing, his reference of Taika Waititi is like completely bazonkers because
it doesn't prove his point at all.
I'm pretty sure before he made Eagle versus Shark that he got nominated or even won the best short film Oscar before that. So he'd already been a proven entity. He was already, like hot shit, like, so I don't think that really works. And then the other thing is that I would argue that Taika Waititi did do what this guy is saying he should do, because he made like 4 other indie features before making Thor, at least 3, if not 4. So it's like, yeah, dude, like, I don't know, this hypothesis is not really proven in your article very well. But, I don't know.
The thing I do agree with Eric Kohn on is, the mid-tier budget, like the mid-tier drama is gone from the marketplace, right? And the movies that like, David Lynch or Cronenberg or like in these like 90s really weird, lovely art house films are not seeing the same success that they used to have in like the 80s and the 90s. So if he's suggesting or implying that the directors need to force us to kind of refocus attention to those type of films, I get it. But you can't really play with people's pocketbooks with this argument. Like, I just think that's really a bad idea. And I wanted to shout out Rebecca Green, founder of DearProducer.com, hero, kind of like a boss of mine. She tweeted at Eric and said, "It's not about a big payout. It's about making a living wage, which is not possible making indie films. We usually work for years for no pay to get the first film made. Then it could take 1 to 3 years, also unpaid, to raise money for the next. Could you work 5+ years without a paycheck?" So I just think that she summed it up really well in the sense of like, it's an economic sacrifice that we're being asked to make when our content is not being properly evaluated, like globally. So to encourage people to say no to a paycheck that could really help a lot of them and their crew, it just seems really like bad advice.
Yeah, I second that. And what was that director, Darren Aronofsky? He made that movie after making Noah. What was that movie called? I want to say it's Muse, but it's definitely not called Muse. It's called something else. But like that is
Mother?
That movie, Mother. That is that movie that you're talking about. That's like a $20 million, $30 million, like weird drama.
So bizarre. I love it. I love Mother.
Bizarre.
It's
yeah.
So weird.
That's the movie. And so like he made all these big budget movies or whatever. And then he came back and he made Mother, And so like the directors can do that, and those movies can exist, but it definitely has to be director driven in order for that to happen, So
And let them do what they want. Let us do what we want, Eric.
So, Liz, I am dying to know, what is this question you want to ask me? What is it? I want to answer if I can. What do you got?
Well, because you make genre films, and I'm writing a horror feature. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to figure out what are the rules of the world. What are it's ours is a witch film. So it's like, what are the magic systems? But for you, it could be that, or like the rules of the parallel universe, or how do people cross over to the alternate dimension? How do you figure out the rules of the world without losing relatability, like without turning it into a film that feels like it could never happen to the audience member? And I'm just curious, when you create these rules, because you do a lot of like zany paradigms in your films. So like, are you thinking about relatability when you write those things?
Yeah, so I spent a lot of time thinking about the rules of the portal and how the portal works and why the portal, not necessarily why it exists, but like how it functions and how it can be used and how it interacts, and like where do you go when you go to the other side of the portal? Like what world are we going into? And so in my mind, it was always like a very specific dimension, that one singular dimension that the portal took Jake to, and that like wherever he opened that portal to, in space, in geography, in space time, that would be that world's alternate world, right? So like when he goes through the portal in the pawn shop, it's like he ends up in a Chinese restaurant, or it was written as a Chinese restaurant, ended up just being a restaurant. But it was just like, because in this universe, that pawn shop was never a pawn shop. It was a restaurant, and so like, it was all about like, if you opened the portal up in the living room of his house, and it would be the living room of his alternate house. But it's not like, oh, where they moved to a bigger house and then it opens up where they are. It's like, no, they just happened to like remodel their house that they lived in. And so it's just the bigger, nicer, fancier version of the same house in the same space. So it was like tied to space, you know?
Yeah.
And then there was a whole thing about like how it closes, and like after a certain amount of time, it would close after you pass through it, you know? And so that was like one of the rules, but it was something that we never said. We never had a line in the movie where it's like, Jake's like, oh, so it closes after 7 seconds. Good to know. I'll write that down. You know, like we never had that line to clearly communicate it to the audience. We just tried to make it clear by showing it a few times. And like, you know, he counts down at one point, like, you know, whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4. So like you can see him counting the seconds till when it closes. So you can sort of get that information. That was a big problem, like in the edit. Like there was a lot of the team was like really concerned that people wouldn't understand that it closes on its own, and then they would think that he closed it on Jake at the end, that all Jake closes the portal on Jake, you know, on purpose. And, you know, it's like, to me, it's like, well, we did our best. Like we showed it happening. We set up the rules. We're true to the rules throughout the movie. Like it happens the same way every time it closes. Every time that portal is interacted with, it behaves the same way. And so we kind of just felt that was enough. But, you know, I think I think it starts with you understanding your rules and then like having like a clear understanding of how everything works. And then whether or not it's going to be in the movie in a clear way or just in a subtle way, I think that's up to you as the filmmaker.
But like in terms of relatability, I think that's the core of the question that you haven't addressed yet, which is like, are you ever worrying about leaving audience members creating a world where they don't see themselves because this massive, zany, bizarre, otherworldly thing happens in the film? Like, do you worry that that device that you're using will make your film unrelatable?
I guess for me, like we tried to make it seem as plausible as possible. Mm-hmm. Like it's a very unplausible thing. It's like very impossible. So the way we wrote the characters' reactions to the portal, it was in a way to try to ground it into reality. So like, you know, Jake has this one reaction where he's just like is obsessed with it, thinks it's the greatest thing ever. Like he's trying to think of how he can use it to his own advantage and like how it can be like something where he can profit from. And then, you know, his wife, Chris, is like, you know, I think coming at it more pragmatically, like, we don't know what's going on here. This is like a bizarre thing. Like, we don't know anything about it. We can't possibly know anything about it because we're not scientists. And this is like something that we don't know anything about. So like, let's be very cautious and very careful with it, you know? And so I feel like through the characters' reactions, like that was like where we were trying to create the relatability to like, you know, if this actually happened to somebody, like how would they react in a reasonable way? I think the issue that we came up to is like that Jake doesn't react to it in a reasonable way. He's not rational. And that's the point. And so I guess we were a little concerned that like people would be like, you know, not buying into that so much. But I feel like through Ed's performance and through the way that we told the story and showed the two worlds, that hopefully we did a good enough job to make it seem realistic as possible, you know?
That's interesting. The reactions thing is interesting. I mean, our thing is witchcraft. So we're like, how do we create a ceremony that's not like a Buffy thing where there's like spells and potions and like someone in like with demon ears shows up or something? Like, how do you create a magic system that doesn't make you feel completely alienated? Like we talked about like the witch and how, or I just call it the witch though.
I just call it the witch too. Okay, I was actually just about to bring it up.
And how you never really see the magic take place on screen. You just see the after effects. And I think it's because it looks silly for someone to chant things in Latin and put things in a cauldron. It's like these caricatured representation of what magic is. So we've been talking a lot about how you represent magic or other worldly elements in a way that still feel grounded. But you have, I mean, with Strange Thing, you also had kind of like a portal too. And it's with Speed of Life, we had the wormhole, and that always became like a question. But because it at its core was a relationship film, I didn't worry about it too much. But when the film's structure is based off of something otherworldly, how do you make it not look silly? How do you know?
Yeah, I think like I love like this approach that, you know, a lot of these superhero movies have been taking to the content to like make it feel grounded, you know, like with Batman and the Joker, and like, you know, like the Joker's got the makeup, he's got the suit, he's got all the stuff that like is Joker, But like, you know, the way that they did the mask was like, oh, like it could be scars, you know, or it is a scar that he maybe self-inflicted at some point, or who knows. And then like the way that the paint is on, it's like very like he did it like in a very haphazard way. It's not neat. It's not tidy. It's like really sloppy, you know? And I think those sort of things is like what helps it seem grounded, you know? So like if you're talking about your magic, you know, like the way I can't remember what I saw it in, but like there was some like seance scene or some sort of magical scene in something recently where, you know, like you just make it seem really dark, you know, and like mysterious, and like you don't see everything, you know, like it's not all super clear. It's not brightly lit, you know, like there is a lot of mystery and unknown to it. And like, you know, if you see like, oh, they're putting a potion together, it's like using like this part, or like maybe it's an eyeball, maybe it's a hand, you know, but like you don't really see, you know, and it's not cartoonish in the way that you like think of a witch like scene, you know, in a cartoon or in like an older movie. It's like very much, I don't know, done matter of factly. And then I think it all comes down to the performances. Like the more that like your actors like are bought into this and that they're not hamming it up and they're taking it dead serious. Like it's like fucking dead serious. Like in your seance scene, it's like dead serious. You know, anything where magic's happening. It's like, I think that makes it grounds it in reality. Like the seriousness and the way that your actors portray the characters, you know, to me at least.
No, that's really helpful. And also what's interesting about witchcraft is that, like, as I mentioned before, I've met people who call themselves practicing witches. So it's kind of like, it's not this completely fictional thing. And so there's like being respectful to the practice that's active, but also drawing from like historical horror references in what you do to like evoke a certain ambiance in the film. So I think I'm going to call upon some witch experts and see if they have some advice, because I know it. I mean, Amy and I we're co-writing the script, and we're like, well, we think candles are involved. And we know we've had access to grimoires, so we've seen some spells. But until you like really witness it, I think it's still going to be this very foreign, silly thing to me. So
yeah, I mean, it also depends on like how you want it to be depicted as a filmmaker. Like if they do a spell, like, do you want to see like a little bit of light, or like, oh, there's the magic, you actually see it? Or is it just like in the air and like you don't see it at all physically, but it just like you see what it does, but you don't see that it actually exists, you know?
We have just or if anyone has any references for great witch movies, I mean, obviously there's The Wretched, which is a great reference, but any additional ones, please send them our way. And you can do that by sending us a question, comment, or suggestion to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. If you like the show, you can leave us a review on iTunes. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at MMIH Podcast, at YouTube at Making Movies is Hard Podcast. And make sure to check out, we are big fans of the International Screenwriters Association. The ISA is an organization designed to help connect writers with filmmakers through publishing your logline to a network of industry professionals, consultation courses, contests. They also have a top 25 writers list. Head on over to networkisa.org. Check them out. Finally, thanks to Liz and Kiet for coming on the show. Sam and Naya from Katrina One PR for setting this up. Our amazing producer, Eric Toms, for being wonderful. Our equally fantastic editor, Jeff Vrymoot, for doing the editing. Thanks to everyone for listening, and talk to y'all next week. Isn't it screenwriting? International Screenwriting Association? Or is it Network ISA? Oh, no, you're right. International Screenwriters Association. We really...
We've been saying it wrong for weeks and months.
I think I've been saying it wrong. I think you've been saying it right every single time.